Here's a question for people like me, who didn't actually anticipate point-and-click games would go away at some point. What did you expect from the future? How did you expect the next batch of point-and-click games to look and to play? Was it the cartoonish look of LucasArts' Curse of Monkey Island or Torrens Passage from Sierra Online? Full 3D and keyboard-only controls like in Grim Fandango?
Buenos días.
The medallion method of selecting verbs instead of using a list or a grid? The photorealism of Phantasmical? Oh, I can say that with a straight face, I'm sorry. I mean, they tried, bless them, but it was only going to look so good in 1995. Especially with their policy of replacing real sets with blue screens. Hell, even 10 years later George Lucas got that wrong. Anyway, I love Curse of Monkey Island. I think it might actually be my favourite of the whole series. At least, it depends on what day you ask. So, if they just continued that path of cartoony visuals and high resolutions, I would have been perfectly content. So I thought. Deponia came out in 2012, placing it safely within what I like to think of as the point-and-click revival, which Daedalic Entertainment seemed to have been working on since about 2008. I would see this game in my occasional glances at the PC rack of my local Pixel Fun Emporium, where I'd look out for these modern point-and-click games whilst mentally incinerating anything bearing the words Hidden Object Adventure. Of course, it ended up being a GOG sale that actually got me to drop some money bags on the game itself. On the surface, Deponia is a great example of the kind of point-and-click games I used to dream about. Titles that stuck to the gameplay formula of the genre classics, but with all the features that modern PCs allow. High-res graphics, a larger colour palette, parallax scrolling, proper transparency, no big-ass clumsy list of verbs, actually acknowledging the existence of the mouse wheel, and so on. Yet, now that it's here, I'm forced to give it a kind of neutral reaction. Partially because I outright refuse to use the word meh, but also because I'm in two minds about this. I mean, maybe my expectations of the genre just got way too high, or maybe the game wasn't that good to begin with. And as soon as I figure out which it is, I'll let you know. Well, let's get on with it then. Here's the plot. You play as Rufus.
They call him Rufus. Rufus.
A young man who longs to escape the garbage planet of Deponia and follow his father to the fabled off-world utopia of Elysium. His latest attempt has him strapping a pod with a giant-ass magnet to a rocket and shooting it at a passing overhead tram which is heading for the promised land. He's, pretty much successful? When he's finally up there, he saves a young Elysian woman from some soldier mans, by accidentally knocking her off the tram which was travelling hundreds of feet above the ground. Karma being a harsh soul with a sense of humour, Rufus suffers the same fate, but whilst he comes out of it relatively unscathed, by the time he comes round, the townsfolk have found the young woman unconscious. That means Rufus's first task is to wake her up so he can claim her, Sleeping Beauty style. Now that's a fairly small portion of the game, but I think it's enough to explain the cover art whilst not spoiling the whole thing for you. And at least by this point you'll have seen one of the rousing musical interludes.
It's kind of pathetic, you get all erratic about dirty dishes congesting the sink.
When it comes to the playing of it, you can see a slight variation of my ideal point-and-click interface. Left and right click only, meaning there's no picking from a list of verbs. You can use or look at an object, but it doesn't display the icon for actions you can't perform. So it's made obvious what you can do at a glance. It even lets you double click on an exit to warp straight through it, and you can press the spacebar to highlight usable items in the area. So I'm liking this a lot. The mouse wheel shortcut for the inventory is something I never knew I wanted until I saw it in action. Doesn't work all that great on a laptop, mind, but you can just press the I key instead. And you all know how I feel about keyboard shortcuts. There's a bunch of puzzle mini-games which are more on the 7th guest side of things, but they nearly all have an option to skip them, which was great for this minecart puzzle because no combination I tried yielded any kind of useful result. I guess it just bugged out on me. Wouldn't be the first time. I also managed to get myself stuck in the first area without being able to move. Thankfully it was only 4 minutes in, so I could just restart. Makes you think though, if you're testing the game, what part of the game do you think is going to be tested the most? Why, did you say the very first part? Of course you did, you're a smart person. Well done you. If you didn't already know that this comes from a German developer, there's a chance you'll figure it out when the subtitles inexplicably change language on you during the conversation. I'm doing nothing special here. I'm in a conversation, one random line will have a German subtitle, and then it's back to English again. And speaking of foreign languages, I really feel for the poor bastard who had to translate all this.
But don't you have to clean the unlatched Postal Service replacement cat's hatch?
I do have to clean the unlatched Postal Service replacement cat's hatch, but there's an unmatched catch.
So what's the unmatched catch with the unlatched Postal Service replacement cat's hatch?
I have to dispatch the batch of Postal Service replacement cats from the unlatched Postal Service replacement cat's hatch to a latched Postal Service replacement's catch backup hatch.
Holy moly.
The fact that this is translated means I'm left unsure about the game's comedy. And then there's the fact that the woman who's the object of your affection is literally named Goal. I don't know, it just rubs me the wrong way. Anyway, the game's certainly meant to be humorous, but it ends up being very hit or miss, and I don't really know whether that could be put down to a loss in translation or if it was just never that funny to begin with.
This wasn't half as funny as I thought it would be.
But the end result is that the game is so obviously trying to be funny and not only failing, but not realising it. As a result, the main character comes off as an even smugger prick than normal. Because Rufus, the man you play as for the entire game, is a prick. He's not a lovable loser, he's not a misunderstood genius, he's a narcissistic, egotistical, maniacal, dumbfuck prick who only has his own goals in mind. And the worst part is, he doesn't even realise he's a prick. You really start to dread situations where he might open his gob for a conversation. The good news is he's only at his worst in his hometown of Kuvak, because there's lots of people there for him to annoy. The bad news is, not only do you start in Kuvak, but that's where you spend about half the game. Now, Rufus's prickitude is intentional, the developer's own description of him bears that out. What confuses me is why we're meant to want to play as him. I've never been so annoyed with a protagonist, and it's mostly reviewer integrity that got me to keep going. I don't know if they were maybe going for some kind of Indiana Jones-esque lovable rogue, but if they are, they're missing two things. One, Indiana Jones was actually competent for the most part, and two, we already have a point-and-click game that does this type of character far better. Namely the Indiana Jones point-and-click game. And the other Indiana Jones point-and-click game. There is something of a character arc he goes through. I presume that's expanded upon in the game's 2 sequels. It does see an improvement when he's far away from potential people to annoy, but these periods of isolation don't so much advance the plot as just throw obstacles in your way. Your overall goal sees no major complication or expansion other than, there is a big ass metal thing in my way until about the last 20 minutes. There's one more thing I absolutely have to mention before closing this out. Not as a positive or really a negative, it's just, it needs mentioning. Completing the game unlocks this option here in the settings menu. If you click it and start a new game, you'll find every line of dialogue, every item description, every word in the script replaced with droggel-jug. Just droggel-jug. And yes, this even includes the musical interlude.
Droggel-jug, 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 droggel. Droggel-jug, droggel-jug, droggel-jug.
There's actually a Steam achievement for completing the game in this mode. I guess it saves you having to listen to smug bastard Rufus, except that you have to listen to this instead.
Yippee! Droggel-jug. Woohoo! Yippee! Droggel-jug.
For every single line of dialogue. I think this is as down the middle as I've ever got on this show. I'd hate for somebody to buy this before they realise they'd rather walk their hero straight through a tunnel of spiky gonorrhea than help him complete his journey. There is a demo version for those of us on Steam, and if you can wait, you'll probably see it in a GOG sale before too long. It's still good to see a company dedicated to bringing us this type of game, even if there's another company doing it better. In any case, this isn't Daedalic's highest rated title, so I'm hoping that one of their other efforts will fulfill my high-res pointy-clicky dreams. And on that subject, it's just plain great to see the genre can still produce a series of games, as well as original one-off stories. And that's not even counting Telltale's episodic games. If you wanted an indication that this kind of gameplay still has legs, I'd say that was it. Just bear in mind that while Deponia is not something to be shunned and avoided, there are better ways to dive into the genre than this.
Droggel-jug, 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 droggel. Droggel-jug, droggel-jug, droggel-jug. Droggel-jug, droggel-jug, droggel-droggel-jug. Droggel-jug, droggel-jug, droggel-jug. Droggel-jug, 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 droggel-jug. Droggel-droggel-jug, droggel-jug, droggel-jug, droggel-jug. Huzzah!